Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by and for returning to the old world. Today we're going to look at the High Elves and what they look like during the time of the Three Emperors. Now we know that Warhammer the Old World is going to be set around the time of the Three Emperors, which is during the reign of the Phoenix King Bel-Hathor, who ruled using the imperial calendar from the years 1503 to 2163. Now at the start of his reign, Bel-Hathor is elected really as a bit of a unity candidate, and he takes a very defensive view, isolationist view. He doesn't want to overexpose his people to potential hazards and doesn't want to get involved in dangerous and potentially costly expeditions. He resists calls from his nobles to launch an aggressive war of conflict against the Dark Elves, even though it's believed that they would be successful in such an endeavour. Phoenix King is concerned that the high losses it's likely his armies would take would be irreplaceable and do long-lasting harm to Uthlan. It was indeed Bel-Hathor, who himself is a wizard prince, so well versed in the use of magics, who ordered the spells that protected the sea routes to his island home to be established, protecting Uthlan from raiders of all flavours. I think particularly there was a concern around Norse and other human pirates. However, years later, Vinnebar was able to secure an expedition where he met up with the rising states of the humans, saw how they developed. Far from being in the mud huts that he expected, he saw civilizations, cities of stone and wood. He reconnected with the Wood Elves, he saw how the dwarves were getting on, and returned with the information he had obtained. This led to Bel-Hathor agreeing to open the doors to trade with various races in the old world. This in turn leads to a boom in the high elf economy and opportunities for ambitious high elves to go back out into the world, make new contacts, and really establish themselves and their fortunes. From a game perspective, there's a huge creative potential here for people with high elf armies. And talking of those armies, what do they look like? Well, technologically, they won't really have changed all that much, I think, from the armies that were around for the end times. We're going to be looking at high quality light cavalry and infantry. Well-trained militias, your spearmen and archer options. Reasonable quality, but very well-mounted heavy horse. The Dragon Princes being pretty good heavy cavalry. The Silver Helms probably fairly mediocre, albeit on horses all of the heavy cavalry could only really dream of. Obviously there's dragons, there's the well-drilled and highly skilled regular infantry. I'm talking the Phoenix Guard here, the White Lions, skilled elite infantry. You've got your light but mobile artillery in the form of the repeater bolt thrower, but probably not anything heavier than that, not looking at the trebuchets of Bretonia or artillery as being used by dwarves or the Empire. And this, of course, doesn't take into account the High Elves will have access to some of the most powerful wizards and mages in the world, and importantly, mages who are least likely to blow themselves and their allies up when they fail to appropriately control the winds of magic. So what does this mean for the High Elves on the battlefield? Well, I think you need to take into account there's real concerns about potential losses of life and the impact this will have on Uthlan. Now, a lot of the nobles won't necessarily subscribe to this view, but it's certainly the view of the king. So minimizing losses is definitely going to be a consideration. So looking at the troops available, looking at that mindset, I think the High Elves will be actually quite an aggressive force and dynamic. Now that might seem odd when I've just made a big thing about reducing losses, but your average elf I don't see wearing the heavy armour, big thick shield and getting involved in a grind fest in the shield wall. There might be some hammer and anvil tactics to really draw in an enemy. But I think a high elf force will be looking to use its speed to create and then exploit weaknesses in the enemy battle line in order to break the fighting spirit of the enemy as soon as possible, because then they can inflict the losses on the enemy as they break and preserve the lives of their own people. In a campaign setting, I think good use of the light cavalry would effectively screen a High Elven army from most opponents, not necessarily all. The Dark Elves, for example, also have access to some very good quality light cavalry. And it would also allow the High Elven commander to have a really good understanding of the ground they were marching along and numbers and other information about the enemy army. Taking this into account and giving some kind of influence on the battlefield is probably beyond most rule sets, unless there are some specific campaign rules being played. But perhaps giving the High Elves some kind of special rule around moving terrain would be quite interesting. I'm thinking the lines that Wood Elves used to get a free wood, which they could place. Maybe once terrain's placed, a High Elf player could move a number of pieces of terrain a few inches in order to try and give them a slight advantage with the terrain. Now, I think that might be a difficult rule to balance. It might involve then having to have all the major factions having an army special rule. But I don't know. I'm not an expert on games writing, just an idea that feels like it might be quite fun to represent the fact that the High Elven light troops are some of the best out there and will give the commander of the High Elf army a real advantage. I say that, of course, that assumes there are light troops selected in your army, so maybe that's a rule that only comes into play if you do have a couple of units of light cavalry on the roster, for example. Who knows? All speculation at this point. But yeah, I think the High Elves overall are potentially quite interesting. Depending on exactly which year the game is set in, when it comes out, it could be a time where either there's a couple of expeditions going out to learn about the wider world, maybe your army is one of those, or it could be just after Finnebar's return, when the doors are open and people are rushing out to get new trade contacts, to re-establish a presence in the old world. And looking at the map that was available from Warhammer Community, I think there were a couple of High Elven outposts shown on that map. So there's some interesting storylines that could be explored here. High Elves trying to carve out some territory for themselves, maybe sort of trying to dominate the local trade, fighting with rivals. Lots of to play for here, really. So yeah, I'll be really interested to see what they do. Any thoughts regarding what the High Elves might be up to at the time of Warhammer the Old World is being set in? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you very much for dropping by. I'm Return for the Old World. Have a great day.